Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to, depending on wherever you may live or however you choose to read your clock, this early morning or middle of the night bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this middle of the night or early morning bonus upload, shall we? All right, folks, I'm going to break this early morning, middle of the night bonus up into two different sections. One section is going to deal with reptilians and that kind of strangeness. The other section is going to contain a video clip along with some feline humanoid encounters. Let's get into it.
The first week of February is a beautiful time of year in the northern Sonoran Desert, east of Tucson, Arizona. Perfect conditions for extended mountain bike excursions into remote areas that feature stately saguaro cactus, large patches of rabbit ear and prickly pear cactus, and desert wildlife that includes javelina, red Mexican wolves, roadrunners, coyotes, and plenty of smaller animals that make full use of the mild temperatures. Another plus for this early springtime time period is that the desert's more deadly residents, such as many varieties of poisonous snake, Gila monster, and nasty bark scorpions, have yet to emerge from their winter hibernation. It was in this idyllic time period that three Tucson bicyclists decided to tackle the tough 17-mile-old Pueblo racecourse east of town the first week of February 2014. One of the cyclists, local Tucson business owner G. Johnson, described the scene. "It's a tough one. It's a 24-hour trek, so you better come prepared with more than enough food and water. There are times you just want to go back and wish you had never got there in the first place. But when you see what nature has to offer you here, well, those regrets dissipate rather quickly." The cyclists set out, and according to Johnson, when they had reached around the halfway point of the course, when they had a highly unexpected encounter that could have been part of the desert-tinged episode of The Twilight Zone. "We had been riding for about, maybe 9 hours, taking breaks every now and then. Then Michael says he needs to stop for a moment. We wait for him to finish when all of a sudden we see this long figure walking across the trail. He's maybe 6 feet tall, very, very skinny, and has an awkward gait, like a monkey or a man with a disease, almost robotic. The men were understandably startled and checked with each other if each of them were seeing what they were seeing. Then all I remember about Michael is him saying, 'What the hell is that?' or something like that. But he sounded far away. He probably used a different word instead of hell. Thing is, we had somehow walked a little towards the thing. Don't ask me why. Maybe to look at it better, not knowing what it was. The creature seemed out of place, even though it appeared to blend into the desert surroundings." Johnson continued his description of the encounter. He stopped, and it made eye contact with me, and I could see him clearly. The eyes were kind of like a snake's, but black with a yellow stripe in the middle of the eye. It had red and green scales on its face and head. The red color was kind of like the same as the desert sand there, and it looked like it had sandy texture too. It didn't have a nose, only 2 holes on it. I couldn't see any ears or hair. The red mouth that looked like it had blood around it, but it didn't look like it was bleeding. It looked like a pattern and reminded me of a chameleon. But it looked like a person as well. Then it appeared to the witnesses that the creature rised up on its long arms with strange-looking claws that looked like a branch full of thorns, and it gestured at them. With a loud chattering sound was heard. The sound seemed to be the creature rapidly rattling its teeth. Then it scurried away in a way that reminded the witnesses of a lizard trying to hide. He looked like he was examining us, and then he ran into the desert. We thought about going back the same way we came, but we thought it didn't matter since we were in the middle of the track anyway. We were scared, to be honest. None of us had ever seen anything like it. It lasted only a few seconds, but felt longer than that, at least to me. So after we talked about it for a while, we decided to go on and finish the track. The men were rattled by their experience, and after talking about what to do, decided to continue on their way and finish the bike course. When you read these stories online or watch them on TV, well, you think, man, these people are crazy, on meds or something, or in need of attention. But this made me a believer. There has to be more of them out there. If there's one, there's got to be 2 at least, right? I know most people won't believe a word I said. That's the way I used to be, and I don't blame them at all, but they are out there. Now, I'm not saying this is an alien or a chupacabra or anything like it. All I'm saying is I've never seen anything like it in my life. But I'm no biologist, so what do I know? The history of lizardmen sightings goes back many generations. Native American legends speak of this reptilian being inhabiting the earth when their ancestors roamed the western portion of what is now the United States. And there are quite a number of petroglyphs that have an uncanny resemblance to what look like upright bipedal lizards. On October 28, 1878, the Louisville Courier-Journal carried the interesting story about a scaly wild man of the woods that had been killed and was on display for public view. Of course, today, wild man generally refers to Bigfoot-type creatures, like the Minnesota Iceman that was briefly displayed in the 60s. But this 19th century version was described as being about 6 feet tall with large eyes and covered with scales. The strange being was viewed by hundreds of curious and somehow disappeared in history, never to be seen again. The California Lizard Man. Lizard Man reports of humanoid reptoids have been reported for generations in California. A fortune hunter in the 1940s claimed that he had stumbled on a labyrinth of an underground tunnel filled with gold under Los Angeles. He claimed that a race of lizard people were responsible for its construction. January 29th, 1934 article in Los Angeles Times, authored by Jean Basquiat, gave its readers a thrill when it first broke the story. Lizard People's Catacomb City. Engineers sink shaft under Fort Moore Hill to find a maze of tunnels and priceless treasures of legendary inhabitants. Busy L.A., although little realizing it in the hustle and bustle of modern existence, stands above a lost city of catacombs filled with treasure and imperishable records of the race of humans, further advanced intellectually than the highest type of present-day people. In the belief of G. Warren Shufield, geologist, mining engineer, who engaged in an attempt to wrest from the lost city deep in the earth below Fort Moore Hill the secrets of the lizard people of legendary fame in the medicine lodges of the Native Americans. So firmly does Shufield and his little staff of assistants believe that the maze of catacombs at priceless gold tablets are to be found beneath downtown L.A., that the engineer and his aides have already driven a 250-foot shaft into the ground. The mouth of the shaft beginning in the old Banning property of North Hill Street, overlooking Sunset Boulevard, Spring Street, and Northern Broadway. And so convinced is the engineer of the infallible of the radio X-ray perfected by him for detecting the presence of minerals and tunnels below the surface of the ground, an apparatus with which he says has been tracing patterns of the catacombs and vaults forming the lost city, that he plans to continue sending his shaft downward until he reaches a depth of 1,000 feet before discontinuing his operations. Shufield learned of the legend of the lizard people after his radio X-ray had led him over an area extending from the public library on West 5th Street to the Southwest Museum on Museum Drive at the foot of Mount Washington. I knew I was over a pattern of tunnels, the engineer explained, and I had mapped out a course of tunnels, the position of large rooms scattered along the tunnel route, as well as a position of deposits of gold, but I couldn't understand the meaning of it. Then Shufield was taken to Little Chief Greenleaf of the Medicine Lodge of the Hopi Indians in Arizona, whose English name is Al McLin. The Indian provided the engineer with a legend which, according to both men, dovetails exactly with what Shufield says he had found. According to the legend as imparted to Shufield by McCacklin, the radio X-ray has revealed the location of one of the 3 lost cities on the Pacific coast, the local one having been dug by the lizard people after the Great Catastrophe, which occurred about 5,000 years ago. This legendary catastrophe was in the form of a huge tongue of fire, which came up of the southwest, destroying all in its path. The path being several hundred miles wide, the city underground was dug as a means of escaping future fires. The lost city, dug with powerful chemicals by the lizard people instead of pick and shovel, was drained into the ocean, where its tunnels began according to the legend, the tide passing daily in and out of the lower tunnel portals and forcing air into the upper tunnels, providing ventilation, and cleansed and sanitized the lower tunnels, the legend states. Large rooms in the domes of the hill above the city of Labyrinths housed thousands of families in the manner of tall buildings, and imperishable food supplies of herb variety were stored in the catacombs to provide substance for the lizard folk for a great length of time as the next fire swept over the earth. The lizard people, the legends have it, regard the lizard as a symbol of long life. Their city is laid out like a lizard, according to the legend. Its tail to the southwest, far below 5th and Hope Streets. Its head to the northeast, at Lookout and Murata Streets. The city's key room is situated directly under South Broadway, near 2nd Street, according to Shufield and the legend. This key room is the directory to all the parts of the city, and to all record tablets. The legend states all records were to be kept on golden tablets. 4 feet long and 14 inches wide, one of these tablets of gold, gold having been the symbol of life to the legendary lizard people, will be found the record of history of the Mayans, and on one particular tablet, the southwest corner of which will be missing, is found the record of the origin of the human race. Schufelt stated he has taken X-ray pictures of 37 such tablets, 3 of which have their southwest corners cut off. Schufelt stated that he has taken X-ray pictures of 37 such tablets, 3 of which have their southwest corners cut off. My radio X-ray pictures of the tunnels and rooms, which are subsurface voids, and of gold pictures with perfect corners, sides, and ends, are scientific proof of their existence. Schufelt said, however, the legendary story must remain speculative and unearthed by excavation. The lizard people, according to Macklin, were of a much higher type of intellectual than modern human beings. The intellectual accomplishments of their 9-year-old children were equal to those of present-day college graduates, he states. So greatly advanced scientifically were these people that in addition to perfecting a chemical solution by which they bored underground without removing any earth and rock, they also developed a cement far stronger and better than any in use of modern times, which they lined their tunnels and rooms. Other locales in California have also produced reports over the years. The following decade, in the 50s, a man driving near Riverside, California, claimed he narrowly missed hitting a lizard man crossing the road. Mount Shasta area has been the site of reports of underground dwelling lizard men. Other Southern California stories also mention human-like reptilians, including some that sound like large, upright iguanas that are often associated with caves and tunnels. There are also reports of water-dwelling lizard type that are said to live in Lake Eleanor, described as having spines running the length of their spine and an extremely shy disposition. These creatures are reported of water monsters and spiny-backed water lizards. Native American legends and some Vogger reports have also surfaced in the lower Colorado River, but no rumors have any documentation to substantiate them to my knowledge. The Black Mountain Reptilian Encounter. Now, desert encounters with so-called lizard men that lurk in the secret around the world are rare, but they are occasionally reported. Case in point. In 1977, Sherry Hinkle lived on the outskirts of Henderson, Nevada, and she recalled a strange encounter reported by her 13-year-old son Mark and a friend who were exploring near the slopes of Black Mountain. That is home to many TV, radio, and communication towers that feed the Las Vegas region. The area is dotted with abandoned mines and caves, and the place was off limits to the boys. But boys being boys, they decided to explore the area anyway, according to Hinkle. They hiked maybe the scant 1 mile across the desert and climbed the little hills in front of Black Mountain. On the backside of one of those little hills, Mark and Harry located a cave. They had to squirm into the narrow opening and belly crawl through the cave to a larger room and turn on their small pocket flashlights. They saw a circular room, roughly 9 feet across. Near the back wall, they spotted a large, deeper hole. They found several large branches that someone had dragged a couple large branches about a mile from the closest tree and tossed the branches into the hole, creating a makeshift ladder to climb down into the lower pit. The pit was roomy, with a short annex. Occasional debris littered the rocky floor, like a tin can or two. A battered teen magazine perched on a small outcrop of rock that served as a shelf. The boys explored the main cave, then turned their attention to the short tunnel or annex and heard the sounds of voices and maybe the distant humming of machines. Intrigued by the thought of them mining nearby, the boys went deeper into the tunnel. On the far end, they found a rusty metal door, and near the door a strange metal rod. The 1-foot rod was lightweight and resembled aluminum, with a cap on one end and a few strange engravings on the other side. Startled, the boys heard the sound of guttural, harsh voices talking, and a certain sound of approaching footsteps. The boys became frightened by the strange vocalizations and hightailed it to their makeshift ladder, and headed out toward the cave entrance on the upper level. As they exited, they heard what sounded like the metal door opening, its old metal screeching. They crawled out of the tunnel opening and ran away from the cave entrance. Thinking they were safe, they breathed a sigh of relief. Without warning, they heard a loud, threatening growl. Harry and Mark looked back at the cave entrance, and to their horrified eyes they watched as a very large, greenish humanoid struggled to force his big body out of that narrow cave. The boys screamed and started running down the slope of the hill, running top speed. They didn't look back until they were near my yard. Now the two boys excitedly told Sherry of their encounter and produced the strange metal rod for her to examine. The rod was approximately 1.5 inches across, maybe a foot long, with a slight indentation at one end, and a plain gray cap on the other. I looked at the bizarre symbols engraved in the 3-inch section of the rod. It was just symbols of spirals, circles in different sizes, a few triangles, and a few unknown symbols. There were no levers or buttons, and the cap at the end didn't seem to move. The rod, with its professionally created symbols and smooth to the touch, I knew it was not a toy, but nothing I recognized. One would think that this would be the end of the encounter, but as it turns out, according to Hinkle, the lizard men wanted their rod back. After the excitement of the encounter, it was difficult to get Mark and her other 3 kids to bed. But after some convincing, they went to his bedroom to get the much-needed night's rest. Then the nightmarish events began. It must have been around 2 in the morning when Mark shook me, whispering harshly that someone was trying to get into his bedroom window. I hoped it was just a nightmare or his nerves were still on edge. Quietly, we slipped into his bedroom and listened to the sounds of scraping at the window's edge. He was not mistaken. In the light of the moon, I could make out a silhouette of head and shoulders of a man. I was alone with my 4 kids, no husband to protect us, so I grabbed my flashlight, suddenly tossing the curtains open to face this man. There was a glare from the flashlight on the window, but past the glare I could clearly see a large head with ridges on the top, other ridges on his cheekbones, and the glow of golden eyes. Mark and I stood still, unmoving. Both fear and shock kept us frozen. The lizard man didn't move either, his hand still poised in his attempt to pry the window open. His hand was large, with webbed, rough, gnarly-looking fingers with powerful claws. After a couple of minutes, not seconds, but long, agonized minutes, with our hearts pounding, I knew I had to do something. One hand still holding the flashlight beam on his face and my eyes still locked into those golden eyes, I fumbled around in the dark with my other hand, hoping to find something to use as a weapon if needed. He glanced at my hand, looked back into my eyes. He turned his head a little, as if he was asking a question. He slightly opened his lipless lips, displaying 4 of his pointed teeth, and suddenly he turned and ran off into the desert. As with the vast majority of stories that feature physical evidence and accounts too strange to be believed, the frightened mother of 4 decided that the rod must be returned to the cave. Later in the morning, we decided the reason the lizard man was breaking into the house was to reclaim the metal rod. Mark and I hiked back to the cave and placed the strange rod beside the cave entrance. Of course, my first question would be, did they take any photographs or video of the rod, or attempt to shave off any of the metal for later analysis? This article doesn't mention any attempts to document their seemingly unbelievable account, but does mention hearing of other sightings of weird humanoid types in the area. We're given no dates, names, or descriptions. The Lizard Man of Scape Ore Swamp. The most sensational and well-known Lizard Man report was a series of sightings of what became known as the Lizard Man of Scape Swamp, also the Lizard Man of Lee County. This East Coast version is a reptilian humanoid, thought to inhabit areas of swampland in and around Lee County, South Carolina. Some speculate that the creature also utilizes the sewers and abandoned tunnels in towns located near the swamp. The Lizard Man is generally described as being 7 feet tall, bipedal, and bulky, covered in dark hair and scaly lizard-like skin on its hands, feet, and face. It is said to have 3 toes on each foot and 3 fingers on each hand. The creature has an incredible degree of strength, more than capable of ripping into a car. A few witnesses have reported seeing a tail, although in the majority of cases a tail was not seen. Texas crypto hunter and researcher Lyle Blackburn has recently published an excellent book on the Scape Swamp Lizard Man of South Carolina titled Lizard Man that details the various sightings and encounters of the strange reptilian being. The first official sighting of the creature was made by Christopher Davis, a 17-year-old, who claimed he encountered the creature while driving home from work late at night on June 29, 1988. Davis had stopped on the road bordering Scape Swamp in order to change a tire, and as he was finishing, he heard a thumping noise from behind him. Turned around to see the frightening-looking creature running at him. He said the creature tried to grab at the car and then jumped on the roof as he tried to drive away. Davis swerved from side to side in an effort to throw it off the top of the car, but the creature managed to hang on for a distance. When he returned home, Davis found that his side view mirror was damaged and scratch marks was found on the roof. I looked back and saw something running across the field towards me. It was about 25 yards away, and I saw red, glowing eyes. I ran into the car, and as I locked it, the thing grabbed the door handle. I could see him from the neck down. The 3 big fingers, long black nails, and green rough skin. It was strong and angry. I looked in my mirror and saw a blur of green running. I could see his toes, and then he jumped on the roof of my car. I thought I heard a grunt, and then I could see his fingers through the side front windshield, where they curled around the roof. I sped up and swerved to shake the creature off. Davis went to the Lee County Sheriff's Office July 16, 1988, and filed a report with Sheriff Liston Truesdale after hearing of another similar encounter that had been reported. On the morning of July 14, 1988, deputies made their way to the residence of Tom and Mary Way, located in a small rural community known as Browntown on the outskirts of Bishopville, South Carolina. The couple showed the officers the vehicle they claimed had been mauled. The chrome molding had been torn away from around the fenders. The sidewall tires were scratched, the hood ornament was broken off, the antenna was bent, and upon closer inspection it appeared that parts of the molding had actually been chewed on, as if an animal had used its teeth to inflict the damage. The Ways pointed out the clumps of reddish-colored hair and muddy footprints that had been left all over the car. News of Sheriff Truesdale's visit spread around the neighborhood, and other locals came forward with their story. Truesdale told reporters later, "While we are looking over the situation, we learned that people in Browntown community had been seeing a strange creature about 7 feet tall with red eyes. Some of them described it as green, but some of them as brown. They thought it might be responsible for what happened to the car." Some other incidences. There were several additional reports of a large lizard-like creature in the months that followed the Davis sighting, and other incidences of unusual scratches and bite marks found on cars parked close to the swamp. Most of these are said to have occurred within 3-mile radius of Bishopville Swamp, which seemed to be the epicenter of the Lizard Man sighting and alleged activity. At the time, local law enforcement officials reacted to reports of the lizard man with a mixture of concern and skepticism, stating that a sufficient number of sightings had been made by reliable people for them to believe that something tangible was being seen, but also that it was more likely to be a bear than a lizard man. 2 weeks after Davis's sighting, the sheriff's department made several plaster casts of what appeared to be a three-toed footprint, measuring some 14 inches in length. Blackburn mentions the media circus that erupted after the story was picked up by wire services. The lizard man stories enthralled the public, who reacted with a mix of skepticism, fascination, and curiosity. Carloads of curious sightseers began to jam Browntown Road as they came for a glimpse of Skateboard Swamp and, if they were lucky, the creature itself. Traffic on the road was steadily from the morning to midnight, something local woodsmen say is a direct result of the sightings. The Item newspaper reported on July 20th, 1988. To make things worse, the WCOS-FM radio station out of Columbia offered $1 million reward to anyone who could bring in the lizard thing alive. This not only attracted more outside attention, it also brought in scores of would-be hunters, who were often armed and dangerous. According to the Item article, 4 local friends, each about 20 years old, brought rifles and trucks to the bridge in effort to do a little sightseeing and maybe collect the reward. When asked if he would try to spare the creature and thus meet the main requirement of collecting the money, Tony White replied, "Damn straight, I wouldn't have to work a day in my life." Reporters, television crews, and photographers also began frequenting the area in growing numbers. As they fished for the lizard man, information from locals and shot rolls off of film to accompany their articles and features. The July 20th edition of the Press Courier reported, "The swamp was swamped with TV crews and other curious people hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature." Blackburn is still puzzled about these reptilian human sightings, and in his book Lizard Man mentions the possibility of these sightings may somehow be related to the swamp apes or Bigfoot. Beyond the standard explanations that perpetually swirl around most cryptid sightings, other more fantastic theories have been proposed by researchers for these lizard man cases. These are not specific to the Bishopville lizardmen. Rather, they are intended to account for any and all scaly or otherwise reptilian humanoids. These theories include rare skin diseases, highly evolved dinosaurs, a race of intelligent subterranean reptilians, and even government conspiracies. Some of these may seem extreme in what many consider to be purely cryptozoological case, but perhaps this is due in part to the very concept of the lizard man, one that defies the basic rules of biology. It's not a stretch to theorize that Bigfoot, if real, is simply an undocumented humanoid, sharing traits of both ape and man, since it is presumably a creature that could naturally occur in nature. But if a lizard man possesses traits of both human and reptile, then this becomes more difficult to rationalize.
All right, that was the first part of this early morning, middle of the night bonus. Let's jump into the video clip and then the second part of this early morning, middle of the night involving feline-like creatures. All right, folks, what a chilling video clip. To me, that does not look like a Dogman. To me, that looks like some sort of feline creature. I know some people have said, look at this amazing video of a Dogman. And no, ever since I've seen this video, to me, it reminds me of these experiences that I've heard from the southeast and southwestern part of the United States and Mexico region. So let's get into this second part of this early morning, middle of the night bonus.
Today's first part of the upload. 10 or so years ago, I was driving with my brother in Virginia Beach. It was late at night and we were going to grab some food. We were the only car on the road, which wasn't really abnormal due to the time of the night. The right side of the road was wooded with trees, and on the left was a fence that ran parallel with the road. A giant wolf-like creature ran full speed in front of the car. It came from the right wooded area and was booking it towards the fence. This thing was at least 12 feet tall minimum. It was hunched over, running insanely fast on its back legs. The legs were bent backward and extremely muscular. The only way I can describe it was they were bent backwards in the way that demon legs are depicted. The legs were furless, except for near the bottom where there were patches of fur. It was wearing a brown hooded cloak that was tattered along the bottom. The hood covered its head and midsection, leaving its legs fully exposed. Some sort of elongated snout was emerging from the front of the hood. It was square like a wolf's, and had fur. The thing never turned to look at us. It was just running toward the fence, jumped, and cleared it. I've never seen anything jump so high. I spent the next couple of months trying to process what I saw. I thought there were some kind of logical explanation until my brother said, "Did you see that?" and described in detail exactly what I had seen. The only thing that differed was he saw what he described as long claws emerging from the front of the cloak. Seeing this thing terrified me. 10 years later, I'm still terrified. Any ideas of what it was? The cloak and the backward legs were something I really focused on. The cloak was cloth, and I'm certain it was not fur or anything else. Today's second part of the upload. In 2014, a very good friend of mine and a local swamp rat told me about some unusual findings he had run across earlier in the day, in the form of some dead hogs. The two of us were at a boat ramp having this conversation, and he offered to run me back over to where they were to have a look for myself. So we jumped back into his boat and headed over to where he had found them. Now, Honey Island Swamp covers about 135 square miles of Slidell, and a fair amount of locals use it as a resource for food and to make a few bucks. He brought us straight away to the area where he nosed the boat into the shore, and after only a few steps, there they were. There were two wild hogs, split open up the middle with all the organs missing, and the rest of their bodies were completely intact and unmolested. They were not a day old, if that, with the mere fact that no gators or anything else had taken them being more than a little bit odd. Their undersides were splayed open, with what appeared to be a rip rather than a cut by a knife's blade. About 30 feet away from where we were was an old elevated tree stand that hadn't been used in many years. My friend said to me, "Come over here and have a look at these tracks." Only a few steps away from where the hogs lay, the ground was very damp with no grass on it. I only mention this because the hogs' bodies were laying on some very thick and matted swamp grass. We were now looking down on many tracks, both coming toward the hog and leading away from them. It looked like a gigantic alligator had laid them down, but they were enormous and all the same shape. An alligator's front and rear feet are slightly different, and their body also leaves an evidential trace or slide on the ground as they move, which was not present here. These were huge tracks with 3 toes and what appeared to be a prong or claw at the rear that had made a distinct hole in the rear of each print, as whatever this was walked back and forth. Neither of us had ever heard or known of anything that just ate organ meats and left the carcass behind. And I'm here to tell you, with all the gators in here, it was a miracle in and of itself that these hogs were left untouched on the bank close to the water for what was many hours. I didn't even think they would be here when we got back over, but they were. Both the hogs' necks were broken, and there were what appeared to be several puncture marks along the upper backs, as though claws had squeezed in on them while being grasped. My friend asked what I thought of the whole thing, and I told him that it had to be a rougarou, or the Honey Island swamp monster. We walked over to a tree stand, and it was perfectly intact, only being somewhat overgrown from years of not being used. There were many blinds in here that old-timers used, and having died, they were left standing. Over the next couple of weeks, my friend and I kicked around the idea of trying to bait whatever did this. So it was that we shot up about 6 nutria and quartered a hog to use as bait. We went back to the stand on Tuesday evening, and having cleared it of all debris, we strung up all the bait on ropes around the stand, hanging all the pieces about 6 to 8 feet from the ground. This way, not even a big gator could pull them down. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the swamp came alive with noise as we sat in the stand and waited. It was at about midnight that we heard what sounded like a distant roar, which neither of us could identify. About an hour later, we heard a scream which sounded like a woman in a horror movie erupt from the forest off to the north. Then everything went silent. It was like someone turned the switch off. Not even a frog was croaking. On a couple occasions, we had signaled each other after hearing what sounded like some movement, but we dared not to turn the flashlights on and scare off whatever this was. I had thought that I saw a dark mass a couple of times, but with the woods being so dark, it was virtually impossible to discern what it was. At about 4 a.m, the woods began to come alive with noise again, and before we knew it, the sun was rising in the east. My friend was the first to notice that the hanging hog was gone, and what we had hung had no organs in it whatsoever. All of the nutrias were still hanging from the ropes as we had left them. Climbing down from the stand, and now standing where the hog had been hung, the very strange footprints were present on the ground below where the hog had been hanging. And the entire hog and rope were gone, apparently having been untied from the limb. If it was the same creature that we heard screaming and howling, it also had the ability to untie a knot. We left the swamp that morning, shaking our heads, and left it at that. I knew everyone would be interested in this, and so there you have it. Make of it whatever you will. As if all what I have told you isn't strange enough, to me, the fact that the hogs had been left untouched while lying close to the water's edge for many hours was the weirdest part. A gator will sniff out small pieces of chicken hanging from a limb and come and eat it rather quickly. And yet, here were two hogs lying gutted in the gator's home turf. But they hadn't been eaten as so much as a nibble. Your guess would be as good as mine. Today's third part of the upload. In 1973, a logging crew working in British Columbia had several encounters with a feline-like entity. It started when they began hearing strange hooting sounds coming from the woods around them. The sounds were unnerving, unlike anything with which they were familiar. They also found unusual cat-like footprints in the fresh mud. Shortly thereafter, the foreman, a man named Woods, was walking through an area known as Cedar Swamp when the hooting sound came from so close by that he ran terrified back to the safety of his caterpillar. From then on, Woods carried a pistol when he was on site. He finally got to see the creature one day, not long after he was driving the caterpillar. He heard a noise from behind him. Turning to look, he saw a tawny-colored creature that he first took to be a mountain lion as it leapt down from the trees. He was stunned when it landed on its back legs, stretched out as if it had just woken from a nice nap, then jumped across the skid into a tree on the opposite side. It all happened so quick, he later said, but he was sure that what he saw resembled some kind of bizarre cross between a cat and an ape. Today's fourth part of the upload. Another fantastic, man-like feline appeared in Kansas in 1998. Ray Jones, a woodcarver and inhumanoid eyewitness, had retired from the farm on the outskirts of central Kansas City to raise his garden, tend to his animals, and render his sculptures in peace. But peace is the last thing he got. He became a victim of an inhumanoid attack. One night in June of '98, while I was working late in the outbuilding I had converted into my woodcarving studio, I thought I heard Elsa or Esther, my two Guernsey cows, making those kinds of spooked sounds that cattle make when something strange is troubling them. Buster, my old Airedale, sat up and growled, and then the geese down at the pond cut loose, squawking and trumpeting like all Billy hell. There were no watchdogs as good as geese, 'cause they are so dangled territorial. Deciding to investigate, Jones put down his tools and stepped outside. There was a full moon overhead and visibility was excellent. Then he heard the chickens raising hell in the henhouse and figured that some stray animal, a dog or a cat, was after them. He grabbed a stick and walked to the doorway of the henhouse, waving it about and shouting threats to intimidate any stray four-legged beast that may be inside molesting his poultry. He failed miserably as it turned out. The beast that awaited him inside the henhouse was not intimidated at all. Although it was almost completely dark in the henhouse, Jones later stated, "I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck when I saw something dark stand up and growl back at me. I'm 5'11", and this thing was as tall as I am. Then it charged me, knocking me flat, placing its paws on my chest and looking down at me. I nearly had a heart attack when I found myself staring into the open jaws and pointed fangs of a black panther. I could feel and smell its feline breath on my face as it sat on my chest, sizing me up for a meal. At that point, Buster entered the scene, barking ferociously at the impossible beast that had pinned me down. Jones stated that he was more worried about his dog than himself, realizing that a single swipe from the beast's razor-like claws could have sliced the poor Buster into hamburger. Then, inexplicably, it rolled off of me. I swear it stood upright on its hind legs before it dropped back down onto all fours and ran off into the night. Jones immediately called the sheriff to report the incident and warned others that a big cat was on the loose. He was told that there were no black panthers in Kansas, a fact of which he was already aware of, and there had been no cougar sightings for decades. When the deputy did finally arrive on the scene, he chuckled at Jones and opted that he had seen a tomcat. Jones stated that he always knew exactly what he saw. A black panther capable of bipedal movement on its hind legs like a man, a cat man. Fortunately, there were no other reports of a creature in the area, and I guess you just jump back to wherever the nightmare came from.
And there you have it, folks. An extra long, kind of early morning, middle of the night bonus. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. After all, it is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives folks like all of us a place to share our experiences and theories judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.